Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. I am still on a mission to try and get rid of some fabric, and today's fabric consists of 4 strips of fabric that are about 4 inches in width and they vary in length. So these are the 4 pieces that I'm going to be working with today. On their own, I'm not really very inspired. So what I'm going to do is make something with these 4 pieces of fabric. Let's see what I can do. What I have done so far is fused this fabric to the back of a piece of stabilizer. I'm using Parlan or Pallan. This fabric here is kind of a woolen type of fabric. Not really sure what it is other than it's some kind of furnishing fabric. So let's see what I'm going to do with this piece. So currently what I have here are 4 individual pieces of fabric that are 4 inches in width, and the shortest piece is about 15 inches in length. So I've just cut some stabilizer up and fused that to the back of the fabric. It hasn't secured very well. I don't know why that is. Could be because of the consistency of this fabric. But that's fine. I can work with it as is. Now, I recently used some webbing in a small boxy bag. So what I'm going to do is join these pieces up to make one piece of fabric, and I'll be using the webbing again. But I'm hoping to get something a little bit different made out of this one. So I've cut 3 pieces of webbing and I'm going to secure that to these openings in here, and then that will create one piece of fabric again. To secure the webbing in place, I'm going to run a couple of strips of double-sided tape down the centre of the webbing. I usually use a really nice double-sided tape that you can sew over, but I also have some rubbish here that you can't sew over. And I like to use the crappy stuff in areas that I won't actually be stitching. So when I sew this webbing onto the fabric, I'm going to be sewing down the long edge and on the outside edge, so my needle isn't going to go anywhere near the adhesive, and therefore it won't gum up my needles. This is a great way of getting rid of any double-sided tape that you have that's just not suitable for sewing. So I'll peel off the backing paper. For those that are in Australia that have been having trouble trying to find a double-sided tape that's wash away and affordable, I've actually managed to find a supplier. So I'm going to start ordering it in bulk, and I'll have it available on my website. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand, postage costs shouldn't be too expensive because it is only lightweight. So I've removed the paper. All I'm going to do is place that over the join here in each of the pieces of fabric. Now, to keep the webbing straight, when it comes off the roll it kind of curls a little bit. So what I'm going to do to keep it straight is just place the webbing over the join. I'll centre it evenly. I'll place a straight edge along the area where I'm going to line this up. Pop my ruler on the edge there, and then that will help keep the webbing nice and straight. And I'll repeat that for the other 2 joins. What I'm going to do now is sew down the long edges of each of these webbing pieces. I'm liking the look of this, and until this moment I hadn't actually decided what I was going to do with this. I had thought maybe I might make a boxy bag, a nice long one like that, and I think that would actually look really great with the stripes on it as a boxy bag. But I've done so many of those lately, and I do still have an extra piece of fabric. So what I'm going to do is make a shopping tote. I'll trim this one to size, and I'll cut this fabric out as well, and we'll find something for the lining. All right, I'm kind of excited about this project now that I've decided what I'm going to do. I've squared up this piece of fabric and I've cut a piece for the back to match that. And for both of those pieces, we need to have some fusible fleece or a batting of some kind. Because this is a heavier fabric, it doesn't really need any stabilizer, but because I've used the stabilizer to help keep these pieces together, I'm just keeping it all uniform. I have 2 pieces of fabric for the lining. Then I've also found 2 extra pieces in amongst this fabric that I'm trying to work on. And these are the sizes that they already were, so I'm working with them as they are. And somebody's already gone and stabilized this with a really lightweight, I think it's an interfacing. So that's all that's on the back of those. This pocket's 9 by 6.5 inches and this piece is 6 inches square. And we need a lining for each of those 2 pieces. I'm also going to use a magnetic closure and I'll be using webbing for the handles as well. Where shall I start now? I suppose we can start by working out what size handles we want for this. And I don't think it needs to be too long, so that looks about right to me. So I'll cut 2 lengths that measure 26 inches or 66 centimetres. I'll set everything else aside for the moment and I'll just keep the 2 outer pieces, the big pieces. And we're going to place the webbing for our handles onto the fabric, and I might as well keep that in line with the fabric that I've got here. So I'm going to place the handle directly over the top edge of the webbing here, keeping the handle nice and flat as I come around, and I'll place the handle in the same position on the other side of the bag. So I'm just going to line the edges up here. Make sure that they're still lined up. And I'm going to sew those in place. I'll quickly go and do that now. So I'm just going to sew really close to the edge here. Secure those with a couple of rows of stitching. So that's the handles in place. Let's set that aside for the moment. This is the piece that we're going to be using for the internal pocket. Place right sides together. We'll sew from here all the way around. Once we've done that, we'll clip the corners, turn it the right way out, and we can go and top stitch the long edge. With this one here, I plan on making a flap to sit over the front of the bag. So it will come from the back to the front like this. So I think we should curve the edges. We'll place these right sides together, and on one side we're going to measure 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres. It really doesn't matter what measurement you have here. The curve can be whatever size you like. Place something with a curved edge over the corner, and we can round that off. We can trim that. And what we will do here, so from this straight edge here, up around, come down the other side, you can leave this open. So I have the lining and the outer fabric facing each other. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And this one is the internal pocket. And backstitch, leaving an opening there for turning through. We can trim the corners. And we'll turn this the right way out. Poke out all the corners, and when it's nice and even, we can top stitch the long edge. Alright, this is the pocket that's been top stitched along the top edge there, and we did clip those corners. I have an opening at the bottom here. We'll attach that to the lining shortly, and this is going to be our flap that we've used to fold over at the front of our bag. We've got the curved edges here. we can just clip into the curve. Now what I've also done with this is go and put another piece of stabilizer on the other side. So this is the outer fabric, which already had interfacing on it. The lining piece, I hadn't put anything on there, but because I want to put a magnetic closure or a button of some kind on there, I've decided to put a piece of lightweight fusible fleece on that as well. So once you've clipped those curves here, we can turn this the right way out and we'll top stitch. So we can take this back to the machine and we can top stitch around there. And once again, we're just leaving that opening at the top end. So that top stitching is done. I have a magnetic closure here, and sometimes you don't get all of the washers that are supposed to come with it. So I'll just use something stiff and make a copy of the washer, because we need one on each of these. And what we need is for this flap to come over from the back of the bag and then fold over the front. And because that is going to fold over the front, we need a closure on the lining side, and that's the reason why I put an extra piece of stabilizer on there. So let's find the center, fold that in half, and I've made my mark about 1¼ inches from the bottom edge or the outside edge, which is 3 centimeters, and it's in the center. I can now take my washer and place the center of that over that mark I've made. I just want to mark the edges of the rectangle that's in that washer, and then I need to make an opening so that the prongs of the button will fit through the fabric. So I'm going through the layers here. I've got my fingers on the inside. I don't want to be poking through the outer fabric, so with my seam ripper I'm going in at one end of that mark I've made, and I'm going to manipulate the seam ripper so that it comes out of the top end of the mark that I've made, and you should be able to see that sticking out there. And once you've done that, you can just rip. So now I've poked a hole in here without accidentally slicing through the whole piece of fabric, because sometimes you can slip. So in there, I'm just guiding it with my fingers on the inside, poking the end of my seam ripper through the top of that mark I've made, and just push that through. And then decide which piece you want going through your flap. And the prongs will now go through those 2 holes we've made. And I'll turn this inside out so you can see what's happening here. So the prongs have come through from the other side. And then you can grab your washer and place that over the top and spread the prongs apart. This is just one of my handmade ones. So the prongs have been spread apart. Turn it back the right way, and you have one side of your magnetic closure in place. We'll set that aside for the moment. Take the back of your bag, fold it in half, mark the center, find the center of your flap. We can line up this mark and this one, place those together, and we can sew that in place. I'm just sewing very close to the top edge of the fabric. Alright, the flap's been attached to the bag. I've removed the label that I had on the front here and repositioned it on the front of the flap, because the flap was actually going to cover it. So now we can put these 2 pieces together. So we'll have the front and the back. We'll line them up with the right sides facing. Okay, so I've got the side edges and the bottom edge clipped together. We can take this to the machine and sew all the way down here, along here, and up the side again. And we'll do the box corners for that shortly. Before we go and sew the outer fabric together, we'll get the lining prepared as well. So I've got one piece of lining here and I've got the right side faced up. I just want to make sure I've got the correct orientation. So this is the width of the bag and these are the side seams. I need to place this pocket to the inside. So once again, I'll fold that in half. Find the centre, which is about there. We'll find the centre of the pocket fabric and we'll line that up with the centre of our lining fabric. And I'm going to position that 4 inches from the top edge for no other reason than it looks about right. So with that in place, I can now sew down the side along the bottom, which will close up the opening in the pocket, and up the side. I'll reinforce the top edges. And what I also like to do is come in about 1.5 inches or so, and I like to create a channel, and that channel will be big enough for me to slide a pen. So we'll go and sew that together as well. Once we've done that and the outer fabric, we'll stitch the 2 lining pieces together straight down the side edges and along the bottom edge. At the bottom, we're going to leave an opening of about the width of your hand. So first we'll sew up the outer fabric, then we'll sew the pocket, and then we'll sew the lining pieces together. And from here, I'm sewing with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm just using my regular 90 or size 14 needle. I like to secure the corners with a couple of back stitches and then go forward and around and repeat for the other side. And I've just discovered I've sewn the top of my bag closed instead of the bottom. I'll undo that shortly. So the only thing you want to sew up are the 2 side edges and the bottom edge. And now I'll fix the pocket in place. And I almost did the same thing. I'm just about to start from the wrong side. So this is the top of my pocket opening. I'm going to start on the side and stitch down. I'll reinforce the corners because there's a lot of bulk there. And once I've sewn the pocket in place, I'll come along about 1.5 inches away from the side edge, about 3 or 4 centimetres. Start with a back stitch at the bottom and finish with a back stitch at the top. And with the pocket done, I can now sew the lining pieces together. So this is the side seam. I'll stitch that together and then sew up the bottom, leaving an opening, and then do the other side. Leave an opening. Okay, so the lining's done. We've got our pocket on the inside and the channel so that we can pop a pen in there. I've also got the outer bag sewn up, and I've stupidly sewn up the top seam instead of the bottom seam. So I do just have to undo that before we can go and do the box corners. I know how much you guys love me to leave my mistakes in my projects, so I'm happy to share. This is what happens when you don't plan your projects. I had no idea what I was making this morning. All right, we've fixed that up. Let's box the corners before we actually put everything together. So we have a seam along the side and along the bottom. I really just want to have a small box corner for this bag. So I'm going to do 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres, and I'm going to take it from that stitching line. So if I measure 1 inch, that's going to give me a box bag of about 2 inches across the bottom. And that should be enough for a tote, because whatever I take off the bottom here will actually reduce the height of the bag as well. We don't need it too wide at the bottom. So 1 inch is enough, 2.5 centimetres. We're not cutting these corners out, we're going to stitch straight over them. So just get in, separate the fabric, spread it apart. We're going to take this corner and pinch it together, and this one and pinch that together. You've got a nice straight edge along here, and we've got this seam that wants to go in one direction. We've got this one wants to do the same thing. You've got two options. You can open up your seams on both sides and stitch across there, or what I usually do is I'll have one seam going in one direction and the other one going in the opposite direction. Because this is quite bulky with the fleecy and also the woolen fabric, I'm having my seams open today, and when I go to the machine I'm going to sew straight over that drawn line. I'll actually stitch that twice as well. So around this side we'll do the same. Pinch those corners out and open up your seams, and we can sew both of those closed. We'll do the same for the lining. We've got the opening at the bottom here, we've got the full opening at the top, and following the stitching line you'll make the same 1 inch box corner mark. You can flip it over and make the same marks on the back. If you're a confident sewer, you don't have to do this. You can just mark the first one and then you'll be able to eyeball it. Once again, grab the two pieces of fabric, separate them and pinch that corner and that corner. And with the lining, because it's so light, you can have them in opposite directions if you like. And that's what I usually like to do. And we'll sew right across both of those drawn lines as well. So I will sew over this twice. And we can do the lining. That's done. We can cut off these little ears. Okay, now we've got to put the other closure on. So this is the front of our bag. Line up the side edges so that sits nice and evenly. And we'll bring our flap across and place that in the position that you'd like to have it. Now I'm not going to close it all the way like this. I've still got to actually put my lining on and top stitch and that sort of thing. But I don't want to have it that tight anyway. So I'm going to bring it up to about like that, because then when it's open at the top, it'll give me almost an inch of an opening. I'll go up a little bit more. I can feel the metal part on here, so I'm going to press down on that, and hopefully that'll make an indent in my webbing, which it has just there. And now I've got to make a mark for my washer. That one's going to be fun to try and open up. Let's see how we go. This one, oh, you want to try not to get in between your fingers and your fingernail. Now just be very careful here opening this up. This closure comes in from the front, so that opening's big enough, and so is the other one. So I can pop a washer over here and that's in position. So that's going to look good like that. Now we can attach the lining and our outer fabric. I've turned my lining fabric the right way out so that we can see the pocket. Now we're going to place this inside the outer fabric. We've got this flap here, and we want that flap and the pocket on the inside to be on the same side. So flip that around so that the pocket and the flap are on the same side of the bag. Pop your bag inside. So you want the printed side facing the correct side of your bag. And if we have a look on this side, we've got the pocket here on the same side as the flap. And that just means that that's the part that's closest to your body. It really doesn't matter which way you do it. So we want to line up the side seam. I'm going to press my seam open once again because of the bulk. Clip that in place, and I'll do the same on the other side. And you want to make sure your handles and the flap are to the inside of the bag, and then you can line up all the fabric around the top edge and clip that all together. And once we've done that, we can sew it closed. So the lining and the outer fabric are nicely secured here. When I take this to the machine, I like to sew with the fabric down like this and stitch along the top. And there's more stability in the fabric that has the stabilizer on it. So I'm going to turn this bag inside out, or the other way around. So I'll have the lining on the outside instead. And then I can go along and sew from here and keep on going and sew along the top of the stabilized fabric. There's less chance of it shifting and distorting if I have control of the fabric this way. So I'm going to use a 1 centimetre seam allowance here. Where all my webbings are, I'm triple stitching over that. This is the side edge of my flap, so I'll triple stitch over there. And part way across. And let's find the opening, and we can bring our bag through. Now what we can do is bring the lining to the inside of the bag, press that out and tuck the lining to the inside, clip it together so that the edges are all nice and even. So we want the lining on the inside and that seam right along the very top edge. Alright, so what I've done here is clipped the fabric together so that the lining is on the inside, the outer is evenly placed on the outside, and just securely clipped the really bulky edges together. And for the flap at the back, when I get to it, I'm just going to make sure that the seam underneath it is actually inside the bag, not up this way. And I'll just continue to top stitch all the way around the entire piece. Once I've done that, I'll pinch the edges of the lining together at the bottom, fold those edges under, and we'll close that up as well. So we'll close that up, then we'll top stitch all the way around. Now I mentioned before I like to see what I'm sewing, so I'm going to turn this bag inside out this time, and I'll be sewing with the yellow facing up. I've increased my stitch length from 2.8 to 3.5 to do the top stitching. And we'll close up that lining. Now we can see how this bag has turned out. So I'm actually really happy with this. Check out the colours. On the inside we've got that big old yellow pocket and plenty of storage space with a nice simple closure. Are you as pleased as I am that that didn't turn out to be another boxy bag? When I first picked up the fabric this morning and decided to put stripes onto the fabric, I thought it's just going to be another boxy bag. I'm really pleased that that didn't happen. I think I've done too many recently. So I actually really like how this has turned out. I had no expectations. I just wanted to play with fabric and use up those 4 strips of fabric that I had. And I think having just the stripes on the front and nothing on the back kind of makes this bag look a little bit more classy. I don't know, it might just be me, I might be biased, don't know, but I really like this bag. The magnetic closure on the front is just a nice simple thing to do. You could put a nice decorative button on the front as well if you wanted to dress this up a little bit. But I think for a piece of fabric that was tucked away in my shelf a couple of days ago, this has turned out quite nicely. I'm very happy with it, even though I did make a ton of mistakes along the way. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.